I went out into the woods to die. Then I learned that there are worse fates in this world than death. My name is Gwen, and, well, for as long as I can remember, I've kind of wanted to off myself. I didn't have the best upbringing, and things haven't been easy for me, so it's not been much of a fun ride. You know, this life that I've led. I grew up near Vanderhoof, British Columbia, Canada. I'm First Nation, Métis, but that's only ever had so much meaning for me, and is more something of my mom's. My father died when I was young, and my mother was incredibly abusive. The only examples of men I ever had growing up were her boyfriends, and more than one of them had tried to have a go at me. This always just made her angry with me, which is insane, and I knew that even as a kid, but it didn't make her hate any easier to deal with. Anyway, because I didn't know what a good man looked like, I pretty much tended to avoid them, even though I think they're beautiful. I tried to have a couple of boyfriends, but it never worked out. And between that and not really knowing how to socialize correctly, I was very much a loner who had very few friends. I struggled with depression all of my life and always had trouble in most of my relationships. My trip to the woods was me deciding that I just had enough of it all. You see, I didn't, nor do I think that I'd ever have the nerve to actually take myself out, but a lot of people go missing in the woods, so I figured I could just hike out alone and never come back. Flawless, right? Yeah. Well, I'm aware of my own ridiculousness, but it goes even further than you might expect, because my lack of nerve to do it myself comes from a distinct and ingrained instinct for self-preservation. I'd gone out on these stupid excursions about 6 times before I ever even heard anything scary, and then, when I did, I ran. I mean, what sense does that make? About as much sense as continuing to do it, I suppose. Which, of course, I did. It wasn't until I went out on autopilot, fully expecting to come back, that anything actually happened. And what happened was that I got terribly lost. I had a habit of just heading off into any old direction that struck me as interesting. Sometimes I'd follow a known trail, and sometimes I'd blaze one through the bush. This time, though, it was October and there was snow everywhere, and I had no idea whether I was on a trail or not. Like I said, I was on autopilot and had only ever done these walks when the ground was clear, so I was just kind of going. I think that going on these hikes, which were really just long nature walks, was actually what really turned my mind from wanting anything to happen. I saw so much natural beauty during them that, more often than not, had me feeling better by the time I was done. I also think that by the time that what had happened, I just decided that it was something I did, and not some insane, stupid plan to kill myself. Anyway, I was walking around in the snow in the wrong shoes, wearing jeans and not paying much attention to where I was going. I heard and saw a lot of birds on these walks and devoted a lot of attention to looking out for them. There were always sparrows of all kinds, black-capped chickadees, Steller's jays, but I had also seen a black-capped chickadee the last time I'd been out and was hoping to see one again. Then I stepped between 2 trees I'd never seen before, turned around, and realized I had no idea where I was. Now, to my credit, I didn't panic. I just tried to retrace my step and get back to a place I was more familiar with. I followed my own trail for what felt like a long time, and it led back to a creek, which I remembered crossing, but where my tracks ended, there weren't corresponding tracks on the other side. The creek wasn't frozen, but it was rocky, and I remember hop stoning over it, but the stones at that point in the creek couldn't get me to the other side, so I couldn't have crossed there. I looked up and down the creek wildly, trying to spot my tracks on the other side, but couldn't see anything that even looked like tracks, and I wasn't sure what to do, and thought about just crossing right there, figuring out how to get back home once I did it. But I really didn't want to get wet, if I could avoid it, that is. In jeans and walking shoes, it wasn't going to be a pleasant journey if I fell into the creek, so I decided to follow the creek until I found my tracks. I thought I remembered coming from the east, so I followed the creek west, and truth be told, I could easily have, and in hindsight likely did come from the west, because I spent the rest of what was left of the daylight hours searching in vain for my lost footprints. I felt like such an idiot for dozens of reasons, not the least of which was that no one knew I was out there. The idea that what I had initially intended for was going to happen kept creeping into my mind, and I jumped at every sound. As twilight gleamed through the trees and cast the whole area in a dim blue haze, I started getting really afraid. But also, I kept kind of shitting on myself at the same time. Every time I got scared, I told myself I had no right to the fear. Because this is what I wanted, right? I felt like such an idiot, but also really sad because I knew that no one was going to come looking for me. Certainly not my mother or my fair weather friends. So the darker it got, the more hopeless it all seemed. I wandered in the dusky light of the blue-gray sky for what seemed like longer than it should have actually lasted, and then, before I even realized that it had occurred, it was nighttime. The birds had long since ceased their melodies, and even the white of the snow looked black to me. I would have used the cell phone light, but I didn't actually have one, because I was too young to get my own, and my mom never bought me one. The night crept in around me, and I could barely see 5 feet in front of my face, if that. So I was taking my time, because all I needed right then was to twist an ankle or something. I almost ran into a tree at least 3 times that I remember, and one of those times was a heavy branch, which I ducked under at the last second, but I tripped and fell forward, face planting into the snow. After rolling up into a sitting position and spitting out snow and leaves, I paused for a moment to assess my situation. Theoretically, I should probably start calling out for help, but I also didn't know who was listening, which again had been the point. But now I was chickening out. I was such a complete hoser then, and I knew it. I thought about just curling up under the tree where I was sitting and hunkering until morning, but I also knew that I'd probably freeze with how cold it was likely to get. I started to cry then pretty hard, and I remember not caring about how loud I got, because I was either dead anyway, or maybe someone would just hear me and help. But no one came, not even to kill me. I sat there sobbing for a while, and I think I let out a lot of stuff that I'd been holding in. My mom, missing my dad, not being able to find or make the relationships that I craved. It all just came pouring out of me, out of my tears, onto the snow and into the earth. I remember sitting there feeling like I was so completely alone in the world, and I imagined that the tree I was sitting under suddenly came to life and draped a branch over me, like a supportive arm on my shoulder. This made me feel better, but also freaked me out a little. But then I imagined the tree's reaction to me rejecting it. Felt bad again, then cried some more. I was and am still a pretty imaginative person. Just as I was forcing myself for my imagined arboreal snub, a gust of wind blew through the area, which sent a chill right through me. I shivered and tried to think how I might go about making a fire. But if I had been going to do that, I should have been looking for dry wood already. It's crazy because it was like my master plan was working flawlessly, and I couldn't tell whether to despair or laugh maniacally. As the wind passed over and went through the trees, it danced around something in the distance, which made an odd noise. It was the unmistakable jingling of a pine cone wind chime, and it was coming from off to my right. A chime like that had to be attached to a structure of some kind, or at least close to one, and I dared to hope that I might have actually come closer to town than I had thought. I got up and picked my way into the direction of the sound of the chimes, hoping with every step that another gust of wind would blow to help guide me. Another gust of wind and another tinkling of the chimes, this time closer. I veered into the direction I'd heard them. I must have overshot, because when the wind blew for a third time, the chimes were almost directly behind me. I jumped in a start and turned around, inching forward in the inky darkness until I finally made out a short wooden set of stairs. As I drew closer to the structure, I realized that it was a cabin, and my heart skipped a beat, and it also sank at the same time. I was so happy that I'd found some kind of shelter, but a cabin like the one I was looking at meant that I wasn't anywhere near town. Moreover, if the door was locked, I was kinda screwed. I politely knocked, but, much as I had expected, no one was home. I tried the front door and sure enough, it was locked, so I checked under the front mat for a key, but no luck. I peered through the nearby windows, but couldn't make anything out within. I tried to open the windows as well, but they were stuck fast. I then circled the cabin, keeping my hand on it the entire time so that I didn't get lost again, and tried to find another means of entering. As I circled the cabin, I spotted another nearby structure, which looked like some kind of wooden shed, at least in the dark. I made a note of it, knowing that I'd likely have to rough it out in there if I couldn't find a way into the cabin. As I passed the shed, I thought I saw movement over near it, and I spun toward it, only to watch a black shadow slip back inside the open doors. Now at that point, I decided that I had to get inside the cabin now, if for no other reason than to put some distance and a door between me and whoever or whatever the hell had just gone into the woodshed. I kinda bolted around the other side of the cabin then, still keeping one hand touching the structure. I had no idea what I was going to do, but it likely involved taking some kind of good decoration and breaking open one of the windows. As I scurried along the side of the cabin, my hand touched something that gave me pause. It was an electrical outlet, and I felt the conduit it was connected to. This was an odd thing to come across, because I didn't expect that this place would have power, but I got excited at the idea that it did. Then I thought for a second and pried at the outlet on a hunch, and as I suspected, it had a levering give. And when I opened it and felt inside, I almost shouted in joy as my fingers traced the edges of a common key. I delicately pulled the key from inside its hiding place and gripped it tightly in my palm, then continued my tracing of the outside of the cabin to get quickly back to the front door. As I moved away from the fake outlet, I heard someone whisper something behind me, and I almost pissed my pants. The voice was soft, quiet, and urgent, but all it said was, "No," like it caught me stealing. I turned, hoping it was a person now, especially since the voice sounded feminine, but there was no one and nothing there. I was terrified and just ran the rest of the way to the front of the cabin, not bothering to touch it any longer, which I should have, because I ran right into the front stair railing. I cracked my wrist on the banister as I smashed into it and yelped, but the noise I made was drowned out by the horrible snap one of the spokes made when it broke free on my knee. Everything hurt, but I was too scared to care, and just forced myself to whip around to the actual stairs and climb up them. When I got to the door, I found the handle again, and I opened my fist, which had been clenching the key the whole time. I could hear more whispers coming from the side of the cabin, and they sounded agitated. I used my thumb to find the keyhole and slid it in as the whispers came around the corner. I distinctly heard the word "stop," which made me turn my head because I was still worried that it was whoever owned the damn cabin. And standing at the edge of my vision was a black silhouette of a woman. I knew it was a woman because she had curves, and I could almost make out brown hair. I peered into the darkness, trying to get a better look at her, but pulled up short as her head lifted and her bright, wide, bloodshot eyes stared at me with an absolutely insane and manic look. I screamed and turned the key in the lock, and her eyes went even wider. I ran inside and slammed the door shut and could hear her whispers surge right up to the door, which I immediately locked. I backed away from the door, thinking that she was going to slam into it, but there was no one on the other side of the glass. And that's when I realized that the whispering had stopped. I immediately collapsed to the floor and started to cry my eyes out again, but this time I was so utterly terrified that I didn't take my eyes off of the door. After a minute, I realized that she was gone, and I tore my eyes away from the front door's windows to look around the cabin. From what I could tell in the dark, it wasn't much more than 4 walls, a bed, a stove, and what I hoped was a couch. I groped around near the stove until I found the box of matches that I prayed was there. I immediately lit one up, just to get a spark of warmth and light near me. I didn't even use it to look around, and just sat staring at the flame until I calmed down. After the match went out, I lit another, but this time I used its light to look about the cabin, and remember hearing my own little light-hearted coo when I spotted an electric lantern. I took it off the wall and turned it on to bathe the entire cabin in pale white light. With illumination, I could see that the cabin was actually pretty modern, if small, and that it had a loft. There was also a couch, as I'd hoped, and it looked comfortable. I sat down on the couch for a minute, still just getting my bearings and figuring out what to do, but then got up a moment later to start a fire in the stove when I saw that there was wood inside. There were like 4 bundles already cut into small planks big enough to fit inside the stove, and each one had a smaller bundle of kindling with it. I tossed one into the stove and lit it with a match. While the cabin heated up, I kept looking around and found a little closet which looked like a pantry. I opened it up and almost cried again when I found not only a large coat hanging on the hook, but also a big pack of water bottles, a kettle, some coffee, and a bag of cheesies. I had no idea how hungry I'd been until I saw the bag, and immediately snatched it up and ate a handful. After I put on the coat, I put on the kettle for some coffee and I sat down to gorge on the cheesies. I had no idea who owned this cabin, but I was thinking hard about how to repay them for all I'd taken. When the coffee touched my tongue, I was so happy that I almost forgot about the crazy whisper lady. I also felt really, really stupid again, for all the same reasons. A loud bang slammed into the door and I jumped, spilling coffee on myself. I guess she hadn't forgotten about me. I shouted at the door that I was lost and I just needed to stay there until morning. I told her that I was sorry for locking her out, but that she scared me. In response, I heard the clear whisper back of, "Leave." I told her that I couldn't because it was too dark. The door just banged again in reply. I felt really bad about all of this, because clearly, I wasn't supposed to be there. But what was I going to do? Just die of exposure? I wanted to let her in, but with the way she was acting, I was genuinely afraid she was going to stab me or something. I also reasoned that I wasn't at all sure that this was her cabin. If it was, why hadn't she unlocked the door? There wasn't a key on the hook, and the big coat was clearly for a man. She was also acting crazy as hell, so no, I wasn't letting her in. Eventually, the woman shuffled off away from the door, and her whisper murmuring went with her. I sat and stared at the door for longer than I think I even remember, just hoping that she didn't come back. I ate the entire bag of cheesies and a bottle of water, then nursed the coffee for a while, and she never did. Finally, just as the fire bundle I throwed into the oven had burned to embers, I yawned and realized that I was tired. I put another bundle into the stove, locked it close, and then turned to the ladder which led to the loft. I had hoped to find some kind of bed up there, or at least a mattress. As I got to the top of the ladder, I smirked as I saw a mattress with a blanket and a pillow, but then paused when I noticed movement in the corner. I quickly lifted my light up to get a better look, scared that the crazy lady had found a way inside. But the light shined on another woman entirely. This woman had blonde hair, and she was in her underwear. She had her back to me and was shivering in the corner. I was so floored by seeing this new woman that I almost fell, but I managed to have the grace to hold on to the ladder. She seemed to recoil from the light, and I felt horrible that she'd been hiding up there the whole time, but I was also terrified for the same reason. I took a chance and called out to her, reassuring her that everything was okay, and I was just lost. When the woman in the loft turned around, I shouted in fear at the sight of her face. Her eyes had the same crazy bloodshot look that the other woman's had, but what was really unnerving was that she had part of her cheek missing. It was like someone surgically cut out a hole in her face, and I could see her teeth beneath it. As she saw me, her eyes went wide and she scrambled in to the other corner, but I thought she was coming at me, so I panicked and I fell from the ladder. I landed on the floor hard, but got quickly on all fours and moved to the couch, where I put my back against the wall and shined the light up at the loft. The pale white lantern lit up the top half of the woman's face as she peered over the lip of the loft, staring at me like she was terrified. I thought about bolting right that second. I was ready to take the lantern and the cheesies and just fly away from the cabin and find a road. But then there was another bang at the door. I didn't take my eyes off of the woman in the loft, but her eyes darted between me and the door over and over again. From the other side of the door came a whisper, "Kill you." I don't know what the woman meant by it. Did she mean she wanted to kill me, or that the loft woman would kill me? I was only kinda scared because there wasn't a whole lot I could do in either case. The woman in the loft stayed right where she was and didn't move, and the whispering woman did not move from the other side of the door. I was trapped, and it was my fault. I never took my eyes off the blonde woman in the loft, and I never stopped listening to the other woman's whispers, even though I couldn't actually hear most of what she said. I just lay there, staring and listening, and trying not to go insane. I have no idea when it was that I fell asleep, or how for that matter, but eventually I did, and when I woke up the next morning as the sun was rising, I looked up at the loft, expecting to see her there, but she was gone. I got up immediately and looked out the window to find a pretty normal-looking cabin property. Nothing seemed odd or sinister from the inside, so I figured it would be safe enough in the daytime to just slip away. I wrote a note with my name on it and left some money for the things that I'd taken, though I knew it wasn't enough. I then unlocked the door and ran outside, only to almost run into a Jeep that had pulled up the short drive from the outlet road behind it. I stood stunned on the porch, like a deer caught in headlights. I was so shocked and confused because I hadn't seen any indication of someone coming up. I leaned forward to look inside the Jeep and saw a somewhat handsome-looking fella inside who looked like he was in his 40s or so. He was staring at me intensely, and I think I scared him a bit. So I waved and I smiled, and he rolled down his window. The man in the Jeep asked me if he could help me, and I told him yes, he could, and I laughed. When he didn't, I tried to explain what had occurred and how I came to find the cabin after getting lost, and asked him if it was his. He got out of the Jeep and nodded, telling me that it was, and chuckled, saying that I must have had one hairy night with those crazy women crawling about. I laughed back, trying to play it off, but then got weirded out the way he seemed to know about them. That's when he stepped a little closer, putting one foot onto the steps as he moved. Both of the women from the previous night suddenly appeared behind him, staring at me, wide-eyed. I almost screamed when I saw them, but they shook their heads, and in the light of day, I finally saw the truth. The woman who had been in the loft, whose cheeks were cut out, was missing pieces of skin all over her body, and her mouth hung open, revealing that she was missing all of her teeth. The other woman, whose body I'd only partially seen the night before, was covered in cuts and lacerations, all of which had been restitched, but still bled. Both women were as pale as the snow and didn't seem to have breath in their mouths. I managed to not scream, but my eyes drifted slowly back to the man, whose own eyes had now taken on darker quality and looked larger, like a shark's eyes. I asked him if he could give me a ride into town, and he told me that he had just gotten there, and what was the rush. I told him that my mother would be worried, and that I didn't want to get into trouble, and he told me that he'd call for my mom in just a bit, and asked if I thought the couch was comfortable. Now I was terrified at this point, and muttered that it was nice while I looked around for direction to run in. The two women who stood behind him sadly shook their heads, their wide, terrified eyes now seeming so very sad. The man chuckled again, and when I looked at him, he gave me a knowing smirk before he grabbed my wrist and pulled me off of the steps. I screamed as loud as I could, and he punched me hard in the head, which only made me cry out more. He dragged me back to the cabin, toward the woodshed that I'd seen before, where I'd seen the whispering woman come out of. I screamed at the top of my lungs, but his hand came up and covered my mouth while he cooed at me and called me a good girl. This was it. This was how I was going to die. I came out into the woods to die, and this is how it was going to happen. I had done entirely too many stupid things at the same time, and now I was going to pay the price for it. I started crying as my feet kicked up over the edge of the shed, and I saw knives on the wall and chains hanging from the ceiling. I knew it was over, and that's when I heard another voice for the first time. "RCMP, let the girl go and show me your damn hands." I opened my eyes and looked out of the shed, and standing there, right next to the cabin, was a man wearing a black tactical vest with the letters he shouted out emblazoned onto it. He was holding a pistol up at the guy who had me, and shouting at him to back away from me. He was also Literally the most beautiful thing I'd ever seen in the whole of my life. Just as I'd become elated, a hand gripped my hair and jerked my head back. But before anything more could happen, the Mountie fired twice, and the grip on my hands was loosened. I felt and heard the Jeep guy fall to the ground behind me, and I knew he was dead. My head spun at all of it, but not so much that I didn't scramble out of that shed and get from between the Mountie and the man who'd attacked me. Once the man was in cuffs, the Mountie told me his name was Kyle and asked if I was all right. I remember looking at him in complete bewilderment and awe. He was good looking, sure, and he cut quite a figure in the uniform, but more than that, he just appeared out of nowhere. He also just seemed so concerned about me. No one had ever been that worried about me in my whole life, and I realized that this is what a good man looked like. I explained to Kyle everything that had happened and asked him how in the world he had found me. As it turns out, he and his unit were in the area investigating the disappearance of another girl. While they were questioning people, a couple of them who knew me mentioned that I sometimes went on these little walks, and when they questioned my mom, she admitted that I hadn't come home, so they were looking for me as well. How he personally found the cabin was a little bit more bizarre and a lot more unsettling. During their investigation, Kyle's unit also got reports of a half-naked woman stranded on the nearby access road. He proceeded to describe the whispering woman to me and said that he'd spotted someone that fit the description turn down this driveway, and he expected to find her but found me instead. When Kyle asked me whether I'd seen the girl he described, I told him the open truth of it all, because it just felt wrong to lie to him. I knew it was nuts, but I just couldn't be dishonest with him, not after he saved my life. He seemed a little surprised but accepted my answer. The next 4 hours were a blur as a swarm of Mounties and other police officers secured the cabin and its grounds, and I was seen to medically and given food that wasn't processed cheese chips. They questioned me about a dozen times, trying to get the whole picture, and I answered their questions to the best of my ability. A lot of them asked what I was doing out so late, and I told them my honest plan, which kind of horrified them. They weren't mean about it and told me that I kind of helped prevent this from happening to anyone else, which made me feel a little less stupid. Now, I don't know much about what they found at the cabin, aside from the fact that they found human remains that had been there for quite some time. What I remember the most about that entire experience, and what I think about every single day, aside from Kyle, who I am now, some years later, happily married to, is the way that Hardell, the guy who tried to kill me, the way he looked at me after I'd seen the 2 dead women behind him. It was like he knew. It was like he had been aware of their presence himself.